Hey there, it's Melissa Brunetti, and welcome to the Mind Your Own Karma podcast. Hey Karma Crew, I'm always grateful that you decided to push play and tune in to Mind Your Own Karma Beyond the Bandage. If you pressed play today, I know one thing about you. You're ready to explore the power of your story as a path to healing and transformation. Today, I'm honored to welcome Ted Neill, an award-winning writer, educator, and mental health advocate whose work spans 5 continents. Ted's memoirs, including 2 Years of Wonder and his upcoming 20 Years of Unraveling, dive deep into healing from trauma, addiction, and injustice. He blends raw personal narrative with themes of inclusion, racial justice, and resilience to show us how storytelling can build bridges, foster solidarity, and transform pain into purpose. It's time to rip off the bandage and dive in. We're welcoming Ted Neill to the show today. Hi, Ted.
Hi, Melissa.
Great to finally connect with you. Your work really weaves together truth-telling, vulnerability, and just the power of a story. And I'm excited to dive deeper into exactly how storytelling becomes a pathway to healing. So let's jump into some questions here.
Sure.
You describe storytelling as a healing modality. When did you first realize that your own story could transform pain into purpose, and why do you believe narrative holds such power?
Yeah, I have to say I learned it from two sources. One, the recovery community. I saw how sharing stories, the recognition of telling your story or you telling my story and recognizing it, my story and yours,
Mm,
um, helped others feel less alone and recognize solutions. The other source was the work of Edward Tick. He's a psychologist who works with veterans who suffer from
mm,
PTSD. And his approach to PTSD is that it's a psychic injury, a moral injury, but most of all, it's a break in our story of ourselves. In the story that we tell ourselves, it forms our identity.
mm,
And something has happened that we can't make sense of. Maybe I think of myself as a good person, but I'm a soldier and I killed others.
mm.
Maybe I'm a medical worker, but I wasn't able to save everyone. And so his work with veterans to re-examine their stories and find a way to resolve those conflicts, to process the grief, to give meaning to it, it allows for reintegration of these episodes with self, and that's when I realized that was one of the contributions to recognizing that telling my story and even giving a shape to my story would help me in my own healing.
Yeah. For the last 2 seasons, I had people come on and tell their adoption stories. A lot of pain in there, and it just was a great way for people to feel validated and heal. It was so healing. I think that was surprising, and surprising for my guests as well, was that they didn't know that by telling their stories and sharing such a painful thing in their lives would help somebody else heal and help them heal. I think that it was surprising for them.
Yeah, I encountered that a little bit, and I know we'll talk about it as we get more into the interview, but with my work with survivors of sexual abuse with 20 Years Unraveling, I found many of them eager to tell their stories and be a part of a solution. And even by getting their stories out there, helping to um, uh, spearhead some reforms that would protect other children. And so that became part of their healing journey too. Really, I think that's what helped them move from being victims to thinking themselves as survivors.
Yeah, so true. So in memoirs like 2 Years of Wonder and 20 Years of Unraveling, you don't shy away from any painful truths. Why is it important to include those uncomfortable details in the healing narrative?
Speaking from my own experience, and I always want to be careful projecting my experience onto others. But what I found is that there's parts of myself that that I had orphaned
Mm,
from myself. And I think we need to find a way to reintegrate those parts.
yeah.
And I think in a younger, less developed state of mind, we tend to think in absolutes, tend to think in opposites. But those absolutes, good, bad, um, they break down in what is really a very nuanced and gray world. And the world, the longer we're in it, it's going to present us with things that break our hearts and don't make sense. And what I found is my Sunday school mentality of wrong and right, um, of kind of transactional justice, it wouldn't hold up to that.
Yeah.
And so we either have to embrace that pain and find meaning in it, um, recognize that, or recognize that the meaning might even elude us
Mm,
and be beyond our understanding. Um, and then, kind of accept that and move forward. Otherwise, we either regress, fracture, or both.
yeah. And that's tough to do if you can't really get it figured out.
And there's things in my story that I couldn't figure out. And so I had to accept, okay, the answers to this are above my pay grade.
Yeah.
And so I have to practice acceptance around that.
Yeah. And again, that is a parallel to the adoptee community because we were like in the witness protection program where all of our identity basically is wiped. We don't know our medical history. We don't know where we came from.
Oh, yeah.
And, a lot of times there's tons of states that the records are still sealed. We can't, figure out who we are, where we came from. And that's hard a lot of times. And even late discovery adoptees that find out when they're 50, 60 that they were even adopted, you know, and now maybe their parents aren't even, their biological parents aren't even around to find. Those kind of things are really difficult to come to terms with and be able to move on from. So I know how difficult that is to do. Um, so in your new memoir that's out now, 20 Years of Unraveling, tackles exposing abuse and institutional failure. What does unraveling mean to you in this context of accountability and healing?
Oh gosh, yeah, it had a lot of layers to it. I think most obvious was the unraveling of the cover-up
Mm,
that was involved with the abuse of these children at this orphanage in Nairobi, Kenya. Um, More figuratively, it was an unraveling of identity, um, an identity of the Catholic nun who had run the orphanage for the past 20 years.
mm,
And I mean, she was seen as a rock star saint. When this woman went to the UN for meetings, she'd get standing ovations.
wow.
In 2019, when she visited the US, she was hosted at the White House on World AIDS Day, in recognition of all of her work. Um, and so there's the unraveling of her identity. There's the unraveling of identity of those people who were on the U.S. board of directors who trusted her and saw themselves as helpful, good people, and would never see themselves as like part of a problem, part of
Yeah.
enabling monstrous behavior. Um, and there's the unraveling of my own naivete that whistleblowers would be embraced.
Mm,
My expectation that the people on the board who have sensibly wanted to help these children and these youth, my naive assumption that they wouldn't be defensive as I confronted them with truths that were shattering their sense of selves, their sense
yeah.
of mission, and then unraveling their idea that these are helpless children because this orphanage had been around for 30 years. And a lot of the survivors that were coming forward, they were adults. These
Mhm.
weren't children who needed a paternalistic board telling them what to do. But a lot of people on the board didn't even know any of them. And so getting them to get past this conception of these are helpless children to, no, these are adults with their own stories and their own agency. That was just another thing that had to unravel.
Yeah. So just hearing you talk, there's so many parallels to the adoptee community. So this is great for the Karma crew to hear this stuff. How do you balance the vulnerability required to share your truth with the need to protect your emotional and psychological well-being?
Yeah, I was thinking about this when you forwarded me some of the possible questions, and I realized that this is a question I'd kind of turn on its head. because it's not either or for me.
Mm,
What I learned from my friends in the recovery community, and I should specify, I'm not in recovery from drug or alcohol addiction, but what I found is in my recovery from depression and my own grief from working and living at an orphanage for kids with HIV/AIDS for 2 years and seeing many of them not make it. I found that 12-step spirituality really helped me. And
mm,
that was something I learned from my friends who had a lot of clean and sober time. But what I learned from them also is that um, a sense of integrity, that integrity is that we are the same person in all circumstances. So I try to be open about all aspects of my life. And if there's something I need or want to hide, then I've probably gone off track in terms of my
mhm.
choices, and I shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah.
So as long as I'm moving forward, living my life, making choices that I wouldn't be afraid to share with my friends, my confidence, my loved ones, my accountability partners, then I can remain healthy. So in a sense, putting my whole story out there in a memoir, um, in some ways felt like an exercise in kind of reintegrating all these parts of myself. Um, and of course, we run a risk. We don't want to trauma dump on people. But
Mm,
the advantage of putting it down into a memoir is that um, the only people reading it are people who want to read it. It's not like I'm sitting next to you on a bus and telling you my whole story.
yeah.
So that's been kind of my approach, that practicing that vulnerability is actually healing for me and healthy.
So tell us a little bit about your healing journey. What was the tipping point in you seeking help, and what did that help look like?
So I was at the orphanage shortly after I graduated from college from 2002, 2004. Um, and it was I originally went as a journalist, thinking I would write stories about the HIV/AIDS crisis, how it's affecting people and children in sub-Saharan Africa. And I quickly found out that I wasn't a very good journalist. I couldn't stay objective, and I was much more interested in doing the direct work of helping provide services, whether it's education, health, etc. Um, but living at an orphanage for kids with HIV, in that time, when I first started, we did not have access to antiretrovirals, so we were losing 2 to 3 kids a month.
Mm,
By the time I left, we did have access, and we were losing 2 to 3 kids a year, which was an improvement. But still, that's a lot of grief and loss.
yeah.
And I want to emphasize, I don't want to take away from the suffering that the kids were going through. I mean, these are kids who have been orphaned by AIDS, they lost their family, they're HIV positive. They're going through a lot.
Yeah.
But then there's a lot we go through as caregivers. And I didn't process that. And
Mm,
shortly after that, I went into working into global health. I worked for CARE. And as it turns out, CARE sent me to continuing to do the work similar to what I'd done at the orphanage, working in healthcare, working in education, but going to war zones, refugee camps, and urban slums, not the best place to process your trauma.
yeah.
And so by 2012, in combination with some other life stressors, I ended up clinically depressed
Mm,
and had to be hospitalized. But I always describe it as the best, worst thing that ever happened to me because like I said earlier, it's where I encountered the recovery community and their wonderful uh, um, framework of spirituality and healing, and just kind of sat down with those who are willing to work with me. I'm like, hey, I'm not an addict alcoholic, but can I learn from you? Can you walk me through these steps, the 12 steps? Because I found that it really helped me get process what I need to process. And as a result, I still volunteer and give back to that community as much as I can because they loved me at a time I couldn't love myself.
mm, yeah. Wow. That I can't imagine working for 2 years with those kids and just watching that happen, knowing that there's something out there that can help them, and you just couldn't get it in time for some of them. I can't imagine. That's crazy.
Yeah, we could do a whole nother podcast about how, the
Yeah.
process of trying to get those drugs for them. And because the generic antiretrovirals were available but were not allowed in the country because of patent laws.
Yeah,
Um, and so we literally had to smuggle them in until
yeah,
they were allowed.
that's crazy.
So, but that was a story unto itself.
Yeah, geez. Well, many trauma survivors feel ashamed or afraid to share their stories. What encouragement would you offer to someone who fears that their truth is just too much?
Mm. It might be. Like I said, we don't want to trauma dump on the person next to us on the bus. And but I think that expression, casting pearls before swine, can apply to sharing our stories. Not everyone is ready for that vulnerability or the
Hmm.
heaviness of our stories. Not everyone can hold space for it.
Yeah.
And so I think we need to be selective about who we share our stories with, and kind of learn to recognize the people who not only have the ability to hold space, but are in a place where they can. Because, I have friends who can be great listeners sometimes, but maybe they're going through something themselves and they don't have the capacity. Um, and I think there's a process of recognizing cultivating some self-awareness.
Hmm.
So when we know if we're taking up too much space or we're falling into a self-pity party or acting too much like victims ourselves, when
Yeah.
we really need to be focusing on healing, um, and working to become survivors. And sometimes that comes from actually listening to others, paradoxically, um, and realizing, again, speaking from my own experience, that I thought the grief I was carrying was something that other people couldn't understand. Um, and as I started listening to the stories of other people, I'm like, oh, actually, I'm not unique in this.
Mm.
And not only did that make my burden seem less, it also helped me recognize that, okay, I'm not alone in this, and this solution that worked for that person over there, it might even work for me.
Yeah. And being an advocate, there's a fine line between getting your agenda out there and then pushing it on people. Um, I think you just have to reflect back on what am I trying to achieve? What is the change that I'm trying to make in the world and how best to go about that? It's not always putting it in someone's face and kind of shoving it down someone's throat. Not everybody, like you said, wants to hear it. So maybe you kind of have to keep that in mind when you're advocating. I know in the adoptee community, it's not popular to talk about the trauma of adoption because it's not that fairy tale story that people don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Um, so I totally get that. And it took me a long time to figure out that line too, because in the beginning, I was really in people's faces about it. No, you need to hear this, and it's like, that didn't go over very well. I don't think I gained any points there doing it that way, but it took me a while to kind of know my audience, as an advocate for trauma.
Well, as an advocate who's worked in the space of child protection and also as part of the care reform movement, I've been working in and around orphanages and the foster care system overseas for most of my career.
Mm,
And we've really tried to move the sector away from institutionalizing children and towards the foster care system. And a lot of countries have gotten the message and are now closing down orphanages for all the problems that they cause. However, I and other people in the care reform movement will make those arguments and will be advocating for community-based care and foster-based care, but having to also hold space for the fact that, yeah, foster care is not ideal either and has its drawbacks. And there are so
yeah,
many people who've been traumatized by that system.
yeah,
Um, and so there's this kind of dance we have to do of recognizing the sensitivities on all sides of these issues. Um, and recognizing sometimes we're just going to fail and it's almost impossible to move forward without stepping on someone's toes. And so just also getting good
right.
at repair and listening to how maybe we've, uh, well, like I said, stepped on some people's toes and not honored their stories.
Yeah, definitely. In your books, you've written about addiction, depression, injustice, global health, and social inequality. How have these diverse experiences informed your perspective on collective healing and storytelling as activism?
I think what it's taught me is the importance of telling our own stories. Um, in in the recovery community in AA, you tell your own story, not others.
Mm,
And that's a lesson I think that can be applied when we engage with communities when we're doing global health work and development. I think one of the problems with the 20th century charity model that characterized a lot of development work was that it was based on these, affluent outsiders who were educated and thought they knew best coming into a community, appropriating the stories of that community, whether it be a farming community in Central America or an orphanage or sub-Saharan Africa, and then using those stories, images of those people to sell a vision of that population to
mm,
fundraise, and often oversimplifying it and painting folks just kind of as victims who needed saviors.
yeah.
This creates dependency. It contributes to white saviorism. We have a
Yep.
poster child for that, and a kind of a paternalistic relationship where the benefits only go one way.
Yeah.
I think as as we've matured in that type of work, there's been more of an effort to cultivate equal partnerships, um, approaching these problems as partners, looking to find solutions together, pooling resources, learning equally from one another. Um, and there are resources and assets, maybe not material, but social, in a lot of these communities that we aid workers kind of parachute into.
Hmm.
And sometimes I look at the strength of a community, the cohesion of that community is a key ingredient to addressing some of the problems. I mean, community cohesion is a key ingredient to the recovery community, where I think in recent years folks have really articulated the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's actually connection with
Yeah.
others.
Hmm.
Um, and suddenly, when I hear that from the recovery community, I realize, oh my gosh, we've stumbled upon that sense of Ubuntu that we talk about in is that collective African principle of I exist because of you. There's no me without you. That in the West we've kind of gotten away from, and
Yeah.
we're impoverished because of that. And then I see my friends, a bunch of former drunks and junkies, suddenly like realizing you know. Recognizing it and finding it among themselves, even though that's not the word they're using. That's exactly what they're finding. It's community. It's
Hmm.
that I need you to stay sober. I need you to heal. I need you to be.
Mm. Wow, that's powerful. That's powerful. You've lived and worked on 5 continents in roles like educator, health professional, and journalist. What role does community and cross-cultural connection play in healing through storytelling?
I think in that context of community work, cross-cultural connections, I think the most important piece to understand is to know and honor the stories of the communities you're encountering, because those narratives inform people's perspectives. You can see this in any type of reconciliation work, whether it's in the Middle East or racial reconciliation here in the States, or wherever. We have to be able to bracket our own stories, bracket our own perspectives, and the primacy of our narrative, no matter how right we think we are, um, and hold space for another's perspective, because that's really
Yep.
going to tell us where they're coming from. So making that space for other stories and being able to set aside the primacy of our own story, I think is where you have that intersection.
Yeah. We see that a lot of conflict again in the adoptee community, people disagreeing on, different things and not holding space for other people's lived experience. For myself, I had like what you would call a good adoption experience, and there's so many that did not have and they always felt like, well, you're negating my trauma by advocating that you had a good adoption experience. There's a lot of cannibalization in the community that's pretty disheartening. which is kind of one of the reasons I stepped away from the 2 years of advocacy I was doing through the podcast. Um, it was just I was getting so drained by it. And we were actually hurting people that were, adoptive parents that were actually trying to help our cause and get the word out that adoption was traumatic for us. Um, because they were adoptive parents, they were the bad guy. And you're trying to make money off of our stories. And it just turned into this huge, thing. And I was like, they're trying to help us. They're trying to help us. And yeah, there's a lot of infighting in that community, which is just not helpful. It's not helping the cause that we're trying to, we're trying to get out there by turning on each other. It's funny what we do, not funny, but it's interesting what we do when we're traumatized and how we react to things that um, are actually for us and not against us.
Well, and I saw that in the investigation as it unfolded at the orphanage, among the young people who had graduated out of the orphanage. There's about 84 what we called alums who had come out of the orphanage, that were still living. And I mean, you had 84 alums and probably 200 opinions among them
Mhm.
about how to deal with this, because so many of them, some of them didn't even know about the abuse that had taken place. And felt like this is the only home I've ever known, and you're bringing up these accusations that could close it. I
Mm,
don't have a family to go back to. I have this home.
yeah.
And then there's other people who are like, yeah, this same home that was great for you was terrible for me. And then you have these people in the same room with each other, and they all grew up together. So it's basically like family dynamics from a really dysfunctional family.
Yeah.
Um, and proceeding in a way that was going to satisfy everyone was impossible.
Hmm.
And yet, you've got to do something.
Yep.
And because the status quo was unacceptable. Um, so there was a constantly, balancing all those
Yeah.
opinions and recognizing that, okay, by honoring the trauma that this group of young people went through, I know it's going to be producing trauma just through the revelation of that with this other group.
Hmm.
Um, but it's kind of like it's impossible to do no harm. So it's like,
Yeah.
okay, what's going to do the least amount of harm and move us towards a place that's actually going to have the potential for the most good. Um, but yeah, we were making trade-offs like that with during the investigation and the fallout constantly. And I think there's a lot of parallels to the work that you do too.
Hmm. Yeah. Oh, definitely. Tons. You talk about healing being layered and cyclical rather than linear. How can listeners learn to embrace the messiness of the healing journey?
Kind of like just what I was saying, like it's messy.
Yeah.
And maybe not taking this perspective of I'm going to do this thing and it's going to be um, completely free of pain. No, it's probably going to cause pain, like maybe over here, but kind of taking that wider view of I'm going to walk towards the option that presents the most potential, the most possibilities for healing and good, even if there is some pain involved.
Hmm.
Um, I think it also means embracing the notion that hurt and harm, at least to me, are different. Some things I'm going to do are going to hurt, but they're going to hurt in a way that, like, working out hurts my muscles, but helps me
Yeah.
build stronger muscles. Harm is like, that's like the abusive parent putting out their cigarettes on you. That's just like, you just got to get away from that. You need to cut off from that situation. Um, yeah, and I think it's also this recognition that, we never arrive at a finished product.
Yeah.
I know there's that expression that, I'm a work in progress. I kind of have come to embrace the notion that I'm a work in process.
Mm,
Um, and that to me, just in my experience, sounds a little bit more like the work never ends and it's
yeah.
an ongoing process
Yeah.
that's iterative and unending.
Right. I know recently it was just like mind blown. I heard somebody say, "What if the destination is the journey?" And I was just like, "Whoa."
That's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I loved it. I loved it. I was just like, "Wow, I'm using that."
Yep.
So, yeah, it's crazy. As both writer and advocate, have you ever faced tension between your healing process and your public advocacy? And how would you navigate that tension?
I think it's when our healing process is at odds with our public persona or private persona
Mm,
that we get into trouble.
yeah.
As I mentioned above, integrity for me is being the same person in all circumstances. So if I'm having to compartmentalize a behavior or aspect of my personality, um, then I'm probably going backwards. Um, and I'm probably walking down the path of hypocrisy, which is dangerous.
Yeah.
Um, another speaking of stealing stealing phrases from other people who are wiser than we are. I really like that expression. We're only as sick as the secrets we keep.
Mm,
So I try not to keep secrets. I'll keep confidences,
hmm.
um, but not secrets, especially if they're my own. And that's also something I've learned in the AA community. It's the secrets, the things we can't share or we're too afraid to share that actually eat us up inside and can lead to relapse. Um, so that has been some that is the behavior that's been modeled for me that I try to follow.
Yeah. I feel like the healing process is a never-ending series of reflection.
Yes, and then also like I've got my AA friends who also like say sometimes you just got to get out of your head, Ted, and just do something. Go
Mm,
focus on solving a problem. Um, recognize that there's other people with problems, not just yourself. When I was in the hospital, uh, someone said to me, and this is a common expression I've heard among people in recovery communities, like, Ted, your head is like a bad neighborhood. Don't go in there alone. And there is some truth to that. Yeah.
that's another good one. So writing memoirs about intense, personal and social issues takes a lot of courage. What daily or writing practices helped you stay grounded through that process?
I'm not sure I have a good answer for that because um, it was the writing for me that was grounding.
Hmm.
Um, I wrote 2 years of wonder as I was coming out of my hospitalization in 2012. It allowed me to give shape to the experience what I had been through about 10 years before. And that's how long it took me to process it all. Um, and then with the follow-up 20 years of unraveling, what was taking place is, um, to condense it a lot, federal investigators have become involved to investigate the allegations what happened to the orphanage because it was U.S. taxpayer money that was supporting the orphanage and its
Mm,
other branches of some of the outreach programs. And so the FBI had jurisdiction over that, or the Office of the Investigator of OIG, Office of Investigator General at USAID, which I mean sadly doesn't exist anymore. But um, but they had become involved. The Washington Post was doing a story. All this was an effort to get the story out there and to uncover the truth after there had been 20 years of a cover up around it. But the process was so slow.
mm,
And the survivors didn't necessarily understand that. They had told their stories to reporters, they had told their story to investigators, and 30 months on, still no story in the Post, and still no public outcries, and still no accountability as far as they could see. And so I thought to myself, well, if the story never gets published, and I didn't know why it was taking so long on the Washington Post side, and I still don't know exactly why.
yeah,
Except that I know that there are lawyers involved and it's very delicate
yeah.
putting out stories like that. Um, but so I started writing down the process of it. and that turned into 20 years unraveling that book. And there's just some irony there, and that it took me 10 years to process things to write 2 years of wonder, but I wrote 20 years of unraveling in 1 month.
Wow.
I decided I'm going to get this out there. And it was cathartic for me. So it kept me grounded at a time when I just was just going crazy with impatience and anxiety. Like maybe the story will never get told. Maybe my credibility um, with the survivors who I encourage come forward, it might be shot. Um, so it was kind of my it provided me with some relief. Like, okay, well, if the Post never gets the story out there, at least at least it'll be this book,
Hmm.
and then I have control over marketing it and getting it out there, and the survivor's story can be told that way.
Yeah. When you first started writing your very first book, what did you know you were writing a book, or were you just like trying to get thoughts out and like get your healing process going, or how was that?
Well, it's going way back, as I mentioned, when I went to um, Kenya originally in 2002 and a recent college graduate. I had visions of being a journalist, and so I thought writing about it would be what I would do. And I tried writing some things down, but I quickly found, as I mentioned, I couldn't strike the right balance of objectivity.
Mm.
Um, and also realized that I'm not that kind of writer. I'm more of a memoirist. I'm more of a storyteller, and so that remove that's required for a journalist, that wasn't in my DNA. Um, so I had written down many of the kids' stories, and I had them recorded. But then I just sat on them for years because another part of the process for me um, was seeing where my story fit, and I had to do a better job of um, understanding where I fit as a white Westerner coming into these communities, and where
Hmm.
that fit into a larger, longer narrative of, like I said, white saviorism and people kind of um, extracting, exploiting, appropriating stories of people who are suffering for their own gain, and that took time. Um, And so it really took a trip to the psychiatric hospital almost 10 years later and getting through that process that I found I was um, able to put it in a form that people could actually read. So I guess to answer your question, I was always writing about it. I've always been a writer. I wanted to be a writer since I was young.
Hmm.
But I find nonfiction much harder than fiction. And part of that's because I had to process my own stuff.
Yeah.
Um, and that takes time.
Yeah. I know I've talked to a lot of um, adoptees who wrote memoirs, and I'm amazed. I don't think I could do it. And like I said, I had a good experience, and I read some of these memoirs, and I'm just like, I could see how healing it would be, but at the same time, just going through that process and putting it down on paper and being like, that was me. Like I went through that, and then sharing it with other people. That's got that vulnerability of sharing that, your innermost, darkest moments is very courageous. And I applaud anyone that can do that. Have you seen storytelling spark healing or connection in others, perhaps in someone who's read your book or friends that have read your book? Can you share a story that kind of stays with you?
Yeah, actually, and it's actually not from one of the books we've talked about yet. I uh, did a memoir about my grandfather that I published 2017. I called it Finding St. Lo, and it was about his experience. It was partly his memoir from being in World War II, and then I filled in the gaps with a couple chapters about my experience with him, and also his experience with um, my mom, her sisters and brothers after the war, and grandpa's own struggles with post-traumatic stress and
Mm.
alcoholism. Um, and I also, through the research, uh, got in contact with one of the family of one of the medics that was in his regiment, and was able to include that medic's memoir as well. And so in putting together that project, I've really been pleasantly surprised by uh, people who've read it and reached out to me who say, this book has helped me understand my parents a lot better,
Mm,
or my father who was in the war a lot better, my father who would never talk about his experience, but I could tell he was suffering. Um, and even in my own family, my mom had seven brothers and sisters who were affected by my grandfather's PTSD and his drinking. I only knew grandpa sober. He was sober by the time I knew him. But it was a rough go for for my mom and her siblings growing up. And so seeing the way that telling that story in a sympathetic way um, has helped heal my mom's family, and then even complete strangers who have come across the book. That's been really rewarding and something I never expected. I really started that project because um, we Grandpa posthumously was being honored with an award named after him, and we had come across his memoirs, and we are like, oh, we should publish his memoirs. And as I was looking at them, like, well, we need to publish more than just these memoirs. We need to fill in the gaps. And so it turned into this unexpected project that had unexpected but really gratifying results.
yeah. Compassion is really a great healer when you can look at somebody who's hurt you and, growing up or whatever, and kind of realize that they're a product of what they've been through, that it wasn't personal, towards you. And being able to gain that compassion for that person is really healing. I mean, I've had that just in my own life. The story doesn't stop with you. There was a before that, like with my birth mother, there was a before that. And I had to realize that she went through a lot. And, even as a kid and even just going through the pregnancy and having to give me up and just all the things, it just getting my mind wrapped around that part of it, just gave me so much compassion for her. And then that the forgiveness came kind of with that. Um, just knowing it wasn't me, it wasn't my fault. She wasn't doing it to me. Although I was a victim of it. It wasn't intentional. That was really healing for me.
It's something I heard from of my five aunts on that side of the family. Um, One of them was born right after um, my mother's brother died in a routine tonsillectomy.
Oh, wow.
And grandpa was just crushed by it. And as a result, he never really got close to my Aunt Elise, who was born right
Mm,
after. And it was more than just losing his son. Um, with the men that grandpa went in with on Omaha Beach, of the 64 men in his company, eight survived. And so grandpa was carrying around this grief of losing all these men he had known for years, he had trained with, who were from his hometown. And at the time um, uh, that my Uncle Mike died as a child, grandpa hadn't processed any of that. He was
mhm.
still drinking. Um, so among all my aunts, when Elise read that and was actually able to make the connection, oh, it wasn't about me. I'm still hurt that he never had time for me.
Yeah.
Um, but oh God, I get it now.
Hmm.
And so I was able to see that healing take place in real time.
Yeah.
And again, like I can't take credit for it. I just was kind of the conduit just by telling the
Hmm.
story. But I think, and that is kind of where we have to go in that process. We have to see through eyes of compassion, the human in the other person, and realize that, there's a time where they were perfect and innocent and pure, but the world hurt them.
Yeah.
Um, and that's why they hurt us.
Yeah. Yeah. For someone listening who feels called to healing through writing, but is scared or unsure of what might come out, where should they begin?
Yeah, well, I touched on this just a minute ago. I think one, um, I find nonfiction harder than fiction, and that's basically because life doesn't necessarily conform to a nice, neat beginning, middle, and end.
Yeah.
And so, a real practical advice I would have is find examples of others telling their stories and study how they told them, how they structured them, note what they left out, and see if that can help you structure yours into a coherent narrative, if that's really what you want to do. And also just recognizing that, yeah, people can tell these stories and it can be healing. And it won't be the end of the world if I'm open about mine. Um, and I think where that starts is actually probably going to some therapy. We need that we need that perspective that that therapeutic relationship gives us, that self-awareness, if we're telling our own story. Because if we don't have that perspective, one, our readers will be able to tell. Um, and if we're trying to get the story published in that sense, editors and agents will be able to tell as well. And so you won't get past them if
Yeah.
that's an important part of the process you want to explore. Um, and then, like that point I was just making, we have to have that self-awareness to know where our story fits. Like in my case, I had to figure out where my story fit with other people of my background and my profile going to sub-Saharan Africa, and where my work fit into that canon, so to speak. Because as time passes, we look at these authors and these works differently. One of the things I write about in 2 Years of Wonder is how encountering the Kenyan author Benyavinga Wainaina, he wrote this wonderful piece for Granta magazine back in the 2000s. It's called How to Write About Africa, which was basically taking to task the way white people write about Africa
Mm,
and Africans and all the cliches that they use and painful tropes. And I realized, oh gosh, he's describing me.
mm,
And it was it was an inflection point in my own growth as a writer and as a storyteller because I realized how I needed to see where I fit, and get some hard feedback from the a member of the very community I was trying to write about.
yeah.
Um, and I don't think I would have been able to absorb that or accept that had I hadn't done therapy, if I hadn't built up those muscles of receiving that feedback, which isn't always self-affirming. Sometimes it's critical, and but ultimately that might be the kind of hurt that we need for healing.
Yeah. Did you learn anything surprising through the process of writing your books that you didn't
Uh,
expect?
that's a great question. I think the thing I didn't know, what I learned from the experience what of writing 20 years of or 2 years of wonder was just how crafting the narrative could give me shape, could give me meaning to an
Mm,
experience that I otherwise had not been able to find the shape to. Um, so that was a surprise. Um, the three things I just described for you in terms of the lessons I had to learn about, therapy, figuring out where my story fits. Those are stories, or those are lessons I learned along the way. Um, and and then I think lastly, again, the point I just made, for me, how hard it is to write nonfiction. Some
mhm.
people find it easier. I've written almost 30 novels. Um,
Wow.
and I have nonfiction writers saying to me, I don't know how you do that. You just kind of make up worlds. I need to be able to do research and find out what happened in real life. And for me, it's like, no, real life is the thing that doesn't conform to a nice, neat story. Um, so I think the process of how hard it has been for me, and you can just look at my output. I have like 30 novels, but maybe only five nonfiction books.
Mm,
Um, so that, but that's me. Some people are great at writing nonfiction, but that's just
yeah.
been my
Yeah.
experience.
Well, tell us where we can find you if anyone wants to get in touch or buy your books.
Yeah, I'm on Amazon, and a lot of my books are also on Barnes and Noble and Kobo, and almost anywhere online where books are sold. You can follow me on Instagram at the real author Ted Neill. I'm also on TikTok, Ted Neill Writes, and you can if you start going down that rabbit hole, you'll probably find me on Facebook, as well as almost all the other social media. But those are my main ones that I update most frequently.
All right. Well, all those links will be in the show notes if you want to get in touch or buy Ted's book. I just love how your perspective really gives people permission to honor their own process, which is so important. We talked a lot about that today, how, perspectives can be different and healing processes can look different. And I always say we have our own unique healing combinations. So thanks so much for just kind of giving us permission to honor that.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me and help me get the story of some of these survivors out there who trusted me with their stories. And every time I'm able to tell it and get the word out there, I feel like it's a little just one more modicum of justice for them, and validation for what they've been through.
Yeah, so important.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Mind Your Own Karma Beyond the Bandage. If Ted Neill's raw honesty and powerful storytelling spoke to you, be sure to check the show notes for his links to his memoirs, socials, and any special offerings he has for the Karma Crew. Ted's work challenges us to confront trauma head on and shows how vulnerability and truth can become powerful tools for healing and social change. And hey, if you're curious about doing deeper healing work yourself, I invite you to explore somatic mindful guided imagery with me. It's a gentle but powerful process that helps you access your inner wisdom, release stored emotional pain, and shift unconscious patterns keeping you stuck. Whether you're ready to explore your next layer of healing or simply want to reconnect with your truest self, SMGI might be the missing piece you've been looking for. Learn more and book a session at somatichealingjourneys.com. If you're loving these conversations and know someone who'd benefit, please share this podcast. And if you'd like to be a guest or recommend someone, reach out through the contact link in the show notes, or you can email me at mindyourownkarma@gmail.com. Always remember, Karma Crew, to take what you need and leave what you don't. And always remember to mind your own karma. I'll see you next time.